Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Woodland Walk for June, the hawthorn tree, the tree that teaches us about blossoming our thorns, making the love bigger than the fear, bigger than the resentment, and moving forward with a feeling of forgiveness and love in our hearts, which is sometimes feels like the real work of our time. And this is such an honor for me to have these two wonderful guests for this Woodland Walk, and they're coming for our Q&A as well in June, our Hawthorn Tree Q&A. Marcina, Hale, Steve and Apkon, they're partners in love and in work, and their organization Reconsider is an incredible organization that even if you've never heard of it, you may well have seen one of the films that has been created from this organization. So Marcina and Stephen work as a producer director pair, and they are incredibly dynamic. They are behind films such as Fantastic Fungi, which you may have seen, but also an incredible film called Disturbing the Peace. And they're now working on various other ones. And Reconsider does so many things. They focus on the mental and social challenges, so societal challenges of our times through films, workshops, experiences, and media. And I really encourage you to look at their website. It's incredible and it's beautiful as well. So Marcina and Steve, thank you so much. And over to you. Please introduce.
Thanks for having us.
Oh, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Yeah. Tell us about your journey to where you are now, and then we can think a bit more about the work of Reconsider and also how people in our community can be involved in some of your upcoming events.
That's great.
Well, first of all, it's great to be here. I always admire your work. And Roz, thank you so much for what you do in the field of psychedelics, but actually, more in the field of consciousness and making these shifts. And I think that's one of the places where, we so much align with what you are doing. And it's really interesting because when people often ask, what is Reconsider? It's really kind of challenging to be able to say the whole context of it, because ultimately we're really about knowing that there's another way of living on this planet. And how do we begin to go through the process and actually be able to look at our mental and societal challenges and understand that we're choosing this way. This is not something that's happening to us, but this are choices that we're making in our everyday, but then collectively as well. And so we do that through different forms of media and workshops and gatherings. And really it's about inspiring that part inside of each one of us that knows that there's another way. And so just a quick background for me, I'm an LMFT. From a very young age, it's funny because I always believed in a world that's loving and connected. And, when I was a child, I believed that. And today, I still do. And it is something that is kind of at the core of my being for this lifetime. And so for me, it's like, how do we bring that out? And ended up getting my degree as a LMFT, studied psychology, went back and got a degree in media, and went back and got my other degree as an LMFT, understanding that if we want to shift this, we have to use media, but we also have to understand the psychology or the patterns and the motivations and so forth that are behind what's happening. And so that's how I got into the field, and then ended up coming into the field of psychedelics about 17 years ago. And it was something that I would never do. I never did drugs when I was young. I mean, maybe once, tried something, but, I come from a family where there's addiction. And so this was something that was very much not a part of what I would ever consider my life to be. But as we know it, there's callings and things that happen and synchronicities that come in. And so that's a part of my life journey. And so I am, trained both in the indigenous traditions in different ways, but also at CIIS. So I like bringing together cultures and how we're doing this in a respectful, very honoring way.
And thanks for having us as well, Roz. Really appreciate being here. I actually also came to psychedelics later in my life, had no experience before, about 15 years ago. And I actually was dealing with traumatic loss in my family and the grief and depression that came from that. And I had been going down the only path I knew, which was first to just suck it up and put my head down and power through, and then to see somebody and to think about taking medications and realize that it really wasn't speaking to me. And somebody invited me to a ceremony, and I knew nothing about what that meant. But it opened up a world for me, and I would say that it allowed me to hold that grief in a very different way. It took me to this place of connection and a place of love, and it was really life changing in that way. And Reconsider has been an organization, a nonprofit organization that's been going for the last 12 years. And as you said, we have workshops that are largely based on Marcina's work over the last several decades. And we also have a farm up in the Hudson Valley that's become a gathering space for people in the psychedelic field. And we're regularly bringing veterans and first responders and healthcare workers and war reporters and addiction and recovery specialists and others. And over the last 3 years, we had very deep dives with each of those communities, both to understand where the systems within those communities were struggling, and what was needed in terms of thinking about bringing what we call transformational medicines, because we recognize it's not just psychedelics, but there's so many other modalities, and what's needed to create the foundation for that. And at the same time, we've always been involved in film projects. Our first film that we were involved in was called Planetary, and it was a meditation on what does it mean for us to all be planetary, all be together on this one rock spinning through this somewhat inhospitable universe outside of here, and how far away we are from living into what's possible. And then, as you mentioned, Disturbing the Peace, I spent about 3 years embedded with an organization of men and women, former enemy combatants, sworn to kill each other, who had gone through very profound transformations and had embraced nonviolence, both within their own lives and then working together. That's called Disturbing the Peace. And then, as you mentioned, we were involved with the film Fantastic Fungi, which we had a great experience with. And then about a year and a half ago, we went back into the Middle East and have been documenting the work of the people in Disturbing the Peace during the last year and a half of really horrific violence in the region. And that film is called There Is Another Way. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about it, but it's been screening worldwide now, and will screen on June 12th, which we'll let people know about.
Thank you both so much. And yeah, it's lovely to hear more about your path to this work that you're doing now. And it's also really nice to hear Marcina's introduction as well about this real sense of, when we really coming back to that sense of the choices that we're making, and then we come to this title of your new film, There Is Another Way. It feels like Reconsider is really trying to do that, help us really feel into what that other way is and live in small ways according to that in our daily lives. So the 12th of June screening is, I would really like everyone listening now to put the date in your diary, because there is a global screening for this film. And that feels in itself like an incredible thing, because that is a ceremony. Lots of people all over the world watching a film at the same time, committing to this idea of learning more about this organization, Combatants for Peace. And actually Suleiman Khatib, who is part of that organization, he was a guest at one of our fundraiser events that we did, which was about a year ago now, and it was incredibly moving to hear Suli speak. So really, really looking forward. And I know that there is, at the end of that screening of There Is Another Way, there is a Q&A with various people, and I think Suli is going to be
including Suli.
Yes. So could you tell us a bit more about that film screening and about your intention of having this global gathering and the Q&A afterwards?
Sure. The journey with the film which is just out about 6 weeks ago, has been really extraordinary. We first screened it in Belfast to a group of organizations that are an alliance of peace organizations, but also to former enemy combatants from the north of Ireland. And they sat there watching it with tears in their eyes, and it was an amazing conversation afterward. We screened it in Berlin, in Geneva, and now across the United States. And the screenings have always had an element of ceremony, if you will, in the sense of creating a container for both complexity and also for imagination, and to be able to transcend the narratives that we're stuck in.
Yeah,
Marcina?
I think it's really important to understand that there's another way, even though it is based in the story with the combatants and the Middle East between the Palestinians and Israelis. This is a global issue. And this is also a very personal issue to each one of us because each one of us are choosing right now what we're doing. And a lot of times, what we've done in the past is we've created lines between cultures, religions, and societies, countries. And for us, we believe that that is the wrong way to divide. If we have to divide, we talk about the way to divide would be the ones who know that there's another way and are working together to create that, and those that are not quite there yet. And and it's really interesting because I think this, when you pull on one string, it's all attached to many different things. And it was funny because I just said to you, for example, that I was raised in a family with addiction. And after doing a gathering at the farm with substance use experts in that community, I now usually say, and I can't even believe I did it here, I usually say I came from a family of trauma where substance was used to deal with the pain. And when we start changing the narrative, we start changing how we see one another and we start changing how we're approaching things. And so, this is a very important part. And like what Steve says, it is a ceremonial because it's a time where we come together to be able to see what we have done as humanity. To be able to sit with the pain that we've created. We have over 56 wars going on this planet right now. Destruction of the planet, the falling apart of our young people. Suicide is one of the #1 killers of our children here in the United States. Can we sit with what we've created? And who is out there to start having the conversations about how we do it differently? And so, when people ask, you say, you're doing so many things, it's actually, we're doing one thing. We're inspiring the understanding that there is another way, and it's within each one of our communities. It doesn't matter whether it's first responders, journalists, nurses, psychiatrists. We all have to have the conversation. We all have to have this conversation to know it's possible.
I actually want to take it back to Suman, um, who is a dear friend, and we've been working with them really over 13 years. And in the film, there's another way Suleiman says that it's actually not between Israel and Palestine. It's between people who hold a war energy and people who hold an energy of peace and compassion and love, a war of consciousness. And in many ways, that's inspiring this June 12th screening, which is to create a space for people who hold that energy of peace and compassion and love, of shared humanity, can come together and both watch the film together, but also to have a conversation. And we'll have Palestinians and Israelis, members of Combatants for Peace, there with us, people who have suffered from profound loss in their lives, have participated in the cycle of violence, but have gone through a transformation and know that there's another way and embody it, and are really tremendous human beings, and we're really thrilled to be working closely with them. And as Marcina said, it's been so fascinating since Disturbing the Peace came out, is to see the recognition. And with Disturbing the Peace, we traveled for 2 years with that film around the world. And everybody would say, this is not about you, this is about us. And it's what we're finding with There Is Another Way. They're saying, yes, there needs to be another way in that region, but there needs to be another way within humanity. And so it's opening up that conversation, both the micro and the macro. If you will, in some ways, that's it has a psychedelic quality in the sense of being able to zero in on something in a moment in time, and to be able to move around it and to understand it in a different way, to feel that sense of interconnectedness, and to be able to zoom out and see the universality of all of it, both our insignificance, as Marcina would say, and our tremendous significance. And I think that's what's so powerful about the film and about the conversations that happen within it.
You know, I think it's also, you know, we traveled with Disturbing the Peace for years, a couple years, and the conversations were always important. And we would rent, you know, Airbnbs with other combatants, and the conversations were always helping us inform each other about really what's going on. In this, one of these last screenings that we did in Gettysburg, we had amazing interview in Q&A after, but one of the women said, you know, is there really another way? I said, you know, we need to stop asking that question. We know there's another way. The question really isn't, is there another way? The question is, why are we not choosing it? And once we stop keeping it at that very basic level of just longing for it and actually take the responsibility for why we're not choosing it, it's a whole big step, and we can move into that. And so I do think that how this dovetails so much into the psychedelic world is you'll see, again, what Steve's talking about, micro, macro. When you're working with people, they're going through a similar process. They're working on what they believe in. They're working on being actually understanding that they are born into a very creative process called being human. And they're born back, actually, they're brought back into the mystery. Because a lot of us are born into these ongoing narratives, which is what Disturbing the Peace is about. And then we perpetuate them, and without even questioning.
It's interesting, Marcina. I think that a lot of like what you talk about in the workshop and other places is this notion of first understanding that we're in a story, and then beginning to understand how that story works, how that narrative is constructed, and how it works. And what we say about the combatants in Disturbing the Peace, because they all went through a transformation from being part of the violent circle to embracing nonviolence. And each of them went through a very similar process, which really, it was interesting because what we found at the time as we were interviewing them was that it really paralleled the work that we were doing within Reconsider in terms of the movements of transformation. And what they all had in common was that they had something happen to them. It could be a small trauma or a big trauma, or a moment, something that snapped open something where they were thrown far enough outside of their story, of their reality, to realize that they were playing a role in somebody else's story. Now, if that's not, a psychedelic experience, of having the distance and the perspective to realize the ways in which the narratives work and where you're participating and where you can choose not to. It's similar to what we found when we were bringing all of these communities together at Reconsider. Both the communities and also individuals on an individual basis and going through the workshop is that sort of aha moment of, that's not like, the reality is not a fixed reality. It's something that I have agreed to. And we've all created it by our agreements, by our complicity. And just knowing that alone is tremendously empowering, because you then have the distance to begin to start to make the decisions that you want to make and create from a place that you want to create. And so I agree with what Marcina is saying, that's the through line for Reconsider, is that sense of, Reconsider, the name, which was brought to us by a third co-founder, Keaton Cristobal, who is actually working on each of the films. He's working with us right now, and There's Another Way. But Reconsider comes from the Latin root of considerare, to be with the stars, to take a more universal look and perspective of what it means to be human and what it means for us to be creating together. And that is the through line, and really in all of the work that we're doing. And it's really the space that we're creating in each of these screenings and experiences and workshops as well.
Oh, it was beautiful to hear you both speak, really. And it just strikes me as well that it makes kind of sense, the work you're doing and telling these hugely powerful stories that we can resonate with, you know, these incredible films that you've made. These films are really, I mean, they are just so incredibly created and made, and they're so beautiful that there's something about creating that world that we can trust. Like when I've watched any of your films, I've just had that sense of you've painted the new story for me, and I've been able to step into it and say, okay, I'm with you, and knowing that other people are watching these films and you're painting the new story for us, those first stages that we need. And it would maybe think about something else that you said earlier before we started recording, Marcina, about the times that and I was thinking that because you're both you have this incredible talent of thinking of the story. What's the old story? What are the new stories? What are the new stories that we need in this time? The story is the kind of medicine. And Marcina, you talked about the framing of the times that we're in at the moment kind of feels like a bad trip, but it's not a bad trip. It's constant learning. And that is an incredibly powerful image. And actually you said it now about kind of half an hour ago, but it really, like, I can feel it's kind of changed me on a cellular level, because that's something that in psychedelic therapy that's an incredibly empowering story for people. There is no such thing as a bad trip. It's a challenging experience, but it's useful. It's going to give you information that you need. It doesn't mean that you're going backwards or that it's gone wrong or that you're broken. It means that you're being confronted with information that's really going to challenge you. But if you can integrate it, stay with it, feel it, this is incredible. This is a gift if you're strongly enough held. So can you talk a little bit about that the times that we're in right now? I mean, even that, it's a gift to me that you shared that, because even though I've worked in psychedelic therapy and said to so many people, there's no such thing as a bad trip, I have been feeling myself in the last bit of time, I've lost my ability. Like I started to kind of slightly dissociate or slightly kind of just feel that feeling of like, I am in a bad trip. Is this real? Looking at headlines, is this real? Feeling so powerless about the situation, specifically in Gaza at the moment. And this feeling of losing my power, losing my agency, losing my hope. And so you say, you know, it's not the question of is another way is possible. The other way is possible. We're living it. And there's a hopefulness in that perspective that brings power and that helps maybe you shift from the feeling of the self-fulfilling prophecy of this is a bad trip and it's going wrong to, okay, we have to really hold a lot here. Can you talk a little bit more about that and about kind of, and where maybe that's coming from, the communities that you're working with, and how are you helping people apart from with your films? And I suppose maybe this is where the workshop comes in. How can you help people? How are you helping people? And how can we all help ourselves to shift from that story of disaster to this is information, we can hold it? And what are the structures that help us hold it? So there's like 5 different questions there, but answer any of them that appeal.
This could be a discussion that we have for a long time. To bring it down to some kind of simplicity is, first of all, I actually believe that our mental health system is sick. It is making us sicker. And and our society is sick and it's making us sicker. And we are, in one way, and that's how come the film Planetary is really interesting, because we find ourselves in the midst of the 6th mass extinction on this planet at the hands of humanity. And yet, when the news gets announced that this is happening, it's on page something like 24.
26.
And we have to take responsibility for the fact that we know more about the Kardashians than we know about the Hubble or the Webb space cam, and the fact that we are such a speck of a speck on this amazing planet. And why is this? That this is where we've gotten to. I actually feel that in part of Reconsider's belief is that we're actually working way below our potential as humanity. And we look for the people that are what we call on the Universe Ready to Grow list, that know there's another way of doing this. And we're calling them out too, as we call ourselves out. Okay, then let's do it. What is in our way? And so we do need to have environments, and that's what we were doing with the gatherings of the different communities, is bringing them together. So first of all, they could meet each other. It's very similar. It is a journey, even though we don't use the actual psychedelic medicine when people come to the farm for these gatherings. It is a journey because you come in and we talk about you meet the facilitators, then you meet the medicine, and the medicine is community. The medicine is the authentic conversations, and the medicine ultimately is connection and love. And you can have that no matter where you are, and then you meet yourself. And then you're able to meet the answers and the possibilities that are there. And so I do feel that what we need to do is that not to really work on bringing the whole thing up, but actually finding the people that know that there's another way. And how do we work together to be able to create systems that are new, that are empowering, that actually address these underlying issues. And I just want to say, I love science. I love quantum physics. And yet our scientific fields and our, universities and so forth in these areas are struggling to actually integrate the very necessary kinds of conversations that we need to have to shift this. This is not a biological issue. There is biology behind it, but there's biology behind absolutely everything, just as like that there's energy behind absolutely everything. That's quantum physics too. Okay, that does not stop us from the very ingrained narratives and the very important six societies that we are bringing these kids and our young people in. And so, one of my favorite sayings that I use all the time is, how many times are we going to diagnose a fish swimming in toxic water? When are we going to have the authentic conversations about how this is not working? And when people come to the farm, they feel like it's a breath of fresh air, where they're actually able to be authentic about what they're feeling, about what's happening in their communities, and they're feeling that other people are also seeing it. But we don't leave it there. We make it's an imperative that we stop and take responsibility for it. All of us. Apathy is a major part of the problem. And so what we have to do is understand what this apathy is doing, why is it there, and what do we need to do to shift it and change it. This is not a competition about who can be the best facilitator, who can have the most people out there, who can train people the most in psychedelics and so forth, which has gone into a lot. This is about how do we actually sit down and ask, why do we even want psychedelics available? We ask that question to everybody that comes to the farm, because that is where we need to have our sights. And if we are just talking about dealing with anxiety and depression, we need to understand that anxiety and depression are appropriate responses for the world that we've created. So we need to actually really stop and ask, how come, how does it make sense that we are creating this world together? So I hope that's
I would add to that because we do talk a lot about depression and anxiety being appropriate responses to the world we've created. And the question is, do we want to use whether it's antidepressants or consumerism or getting lost in the media and television and our screens on our phones to numb what is actually a very effective early warning sign that something is not aligned, both in our lives and in our society. And I want to speak to the question of it being like a bad trip, in the sense of, because I think that we both have to have the expansive view and the historical view of, we're here in Spain right now, and we were in Madrid, and we're going through the different progression of churches, and learned how, it was the Arab community that first settled Madrid, and it took hundreds of years, and they were driven out by the church, under the rule of the Pope, who basically was like the the chief in command of the army. It is not, unfortunately, the Gaza and Israel is not the first time that this has been happening in our history. The difference is that we have perfected weapons and the ability to destroy so many people in such an impersonal way. And I think that we have to be careful that when we talk about it like a bad trip, we have to also recognize that there is the reality of it. And there have been more than 50,000 people killed, that there have been more than 13,000 children killed in Gaza, that even this week alone, 100 people a day are being killed, 2 million people displaced. That is a reality.
And that's
And
only
so
one of our realities.
it's only one of our realities. And so we need to both hold that somehow this is where humanity need to get to,
Yeah.
and at the same time hold the reality of what's going on for all of those individuals and work toward the cessation of that violence. And so it's the holding of both of those things that's so important. And yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment.
Well, yes, thank you so much for that perspective too. And it kind of links into going from that huge perspective, bringing it right down to a little fractal of that, which is the hawthorn tree, which is the tree that we work with in June. So we're in the hawthorn tree, we have the idea of blossoming the thorn. So that's the process that we're trying to do. It's the kind of the new story is the blossom, the old story is the thorn. So, and it links to what you were just saying then, Steve, because we talk about the hawthorn tree and how in the wintertime the tree is completely bare and it looks like barbed wire. A hawthorn tree, I don't know if you have them on your farm maybe, but they look like barbed wire. They're grey, they're so spiky, they hurt if you touch them. And then when the spring comes, these huge flowers bloom so kind of ostentatiously that you can't see any of the thorns anymore. And the whole thing just looks like this beautiful kind of cloud. But the reason we use that tree is because the thorn doesn't go away. The reality of the pain and the suffering is at the core. And it's like, this is what it's like, almost like a thorn that runs through the heart of like that the despair and the destruction of that old story that we still is still true and is still happening. And then that feeling of like, and when we become the hawthorn tree, we do a journey where we become the hawthorn tree and we feel the spikes all over us, and we feel the embodied process of breathing up from the earth, the life force energy from the earth, the interconnectedness of the roots, and we breathe up that kind of cold mud through the body, feel that transformation of turning it into sap and sending it to the fingertips, and feeling our fingertips going from being scratchy and thorned to blooming and blossoming. So I suppose that's the two stories, like the story of the thorn that's real and true and hurts, and the story of the flower, which is what we're trying to build, but we don't ever lose thorn. It's like we don't, it's like the whole idea of forgiveness.
I actually have chills as you're saying that, because there's also another metaphor that comes to me, and I think probably to Marcina, in as you were describing this, Ross, and maybe I can offer this. The thorn, as I experienced as you were talking about it, is our capacity for violence, our capacity to want to protect, and the willingness to hurt others to do that. And the blossom is our capacity for peace, for compassion, for love. And both of those complete the hawthorn tree, and both of those are existent at all times, because the possibility of the blossom is there even in the middle of winter. It still exists because we know it's the essence of the tree. And one without the other would not be the hawthorn tree. And so the recognition of the integration, if you will, because it's interesting from a psychedelic perspective, we've always talked about integration as being the integration, not of how do I integrate the experience that I had into my life, but how do I integrate the fullness of my humanity and what it means to be me and to be human into my self, into my experience. And the combatants talk a lot about it. You know, they tell their personal stories of their involvement in the cycle of violence, not because they're seeking forgiveness, but because they're recognizing what they're capable of. And in doing so, that's the thorn, but they also recognize the blossom. and the choices that they've made and the beauty that they hold and the work that they're doing for humanity. And so it's another way of thinking about those two aspects of really essentially the same thing, which is humanity.
Well, and I want to say that, you know, with Reconsider and the work that we do and the work, the workshops and so forth, we look at trauma in a way of understanding that it is a part of being human. Every human being will go through trauma. In fact, you know, Stan Grof's work is, you know, will say even the birthing process itself is traumatic. And, you know, and trauma itself is not the problem. It's how we're relating to it. And some of the most amazing people are the ones that have been through some of the most traumatic events. And usually there's a depth that can come from that experience. And you see it all the time. That doesn't mean we want to create trauma, but there is actually, you know, a place, you know, one of the questions we always ask people is, would you rather be the victim or the victimizer? You're allowed to come down to this planet and you can choose which one you can be. Which one do you choose to be? And very few people will say, I want to be the victimizer. We are stuck in cycles. There's not a baby that I know that you don't have babies, you know, raising their hands, I want to grow up to be a murderer or this or that. It's just not happening. So we have to look at what the cycles are and, you know, and how do we get out of it, but how do we also get other people that are out of it? How do we have compassion for those that are stuck in the cycle of violence? And it was one of the concepts we've been playing with is this idea of dominance. And, you know, and I've thought about that. I said, okay, let's say that's true. We have to have dominance on the planet because somebody's going to dominate. Then, all right, then game on. Let's dominate with love and compassion. Again, take it in another way. Okay, let's dominate. That means that energy has got to become more prevalent, stronger, able to speak, able to be able to manifest. And in order to do that, that energy cannot be wounded. A lot of times we think of being loving as we got to protect and we got to be wounded. No, we got to be the freaking flower and get out there and show what's possible. And so there is this place of how are we embedded in these stories that are actually holding us back from being what we want to be. And who's in the film, There's Another Way, she's Palestinian. She'll say, you know, we are the majority. Because the majority of people want to live in community, in a very peaceful place with security and caring for one another. That's the majority of humanity. And so this is where we can give voice to and inspire each other. And I do think that that's the challenge of our time. I don't think what's happening is happening against us. In one way, it's happening for us, right? That kind of way of looking at it. And what is it actually going to ignite? And it can ignite more hate and more division, or it can ignite the decision not to choose that way and actually bring us to a different conversation. And and that's what we know is possible, and we want to hold it for ourselves first, and hold ourselves responsible for it, and then see the potential in humanity's ability and readiness. Because as you know, in working with clients, you cannot get ahead of the client. You don't get ahead of where a person is. And so we might have to stay in a certain sense of suffering for as long as we need to be able to realize that we don't have to do it this way. And it can be very painful as you're watching somebody suffer through not making different choices, but it still has to have its own process. So.
Also, as painful as it is to be where we are, we have to recognize that things were not working. Where we were. We were still dealing with tremendous issues that we're facing, the sustainability of humanity on this planet, let alone every other life form. Let's not just be human centric. I mean, as Marcina said, within planetary, we're facing the sixth mass extinction, where the degradation of the planet, of nature, of life was there. Are the gaps between people with enormous wealth and people who were struggling, the addictions, all of that stuff was there before this current moment in time. What's painful in some ways is that it wasn't painful enough for us to choose something different and to do the hard work we needed to do. The level of apathy in people who were doing just good enough allowed it not only to perpetuate, but to get to where we are. So in some ways, the question is, I guess we had to get to this point because we're here. We were working on a film idea years ago that we, for a variety of reasons, we haven't done, but it was called, at the time, it was called 3 Minutes Till Midnight, a love story. And it was about the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists who, after World War II and the detonation of the atomic bomb, had created an organization to warn us about the threat of our self-annihilation, the annihilation of humanity on this planet by our own actions. And they created this doomsday clock, which every year they would set the hands of the clock how close we were to midnight being self-annihilation. And at the time, it was 3 minutes. Over the course of doing this, the production on the pre-production, the research on it, it went to 2.5 minutes, 2 minutes, 90 seconds. It's now at 80 seconds till midnight. And we interviewed the scientists who were setting the hands, and they sat there with tears in their eyes, distraught, despair. How can we get people to pay attention and to care? And so the pain is both that it took us to get here, to have to experience this pain. The hope is that we don't have to go further, and that we can make different choices.
But and it was also, it's not just how close we are to self-annihilation, but how far away we are from living what we can live. I mean, that to me is what's fascinating. I mean, we were just on these trains in Madrid. We were watching the energy. The energy is so low right now. People aren't looking at each other. They are, I've been walking around in the airports and everything, and I'm always like kind of smiling, trying to find those eyes. And every once in a while, you'll get those pair of eyes that like look and then like smile and like, okay, you're awake. It's like, when do we lift up our heads and look at each other and acknowledge each other? And it was funny, I was actually doing that one time from California, and it was really, really early flight. And I was coming in and I was looking, and nobody was looking up, nobody was interacting. And finally, there's this one person that I saw, and our eyes met. We like looked at each other and we kind of smiled. And then we got on the airplane, we were sitting next to each other. So it was funny. Yeah.
We were on the subway this morning in Madrid, and I looked around, and literally, and I counted, of the 25 people on the train, 22 of them were staring at their phone in their hand. 22 of them. One was asleep, and 2 people were talking to each other. And that was it.
You know,
And Marcina and I were talking at the time of, we should do a short film that shows people actually put down their phones, and what's the joy you can feel in your heart of connecting with another human being.
With a real person, a real 3D person, right?
Yeah, and like these tools of technology have been marketed to us and told us that they're going to bring us closer together, and they're going to create connection, and they're going to create love, and they're going to create community. And we're more separated. We're further apart. We did a Q&A just after COVID started. We did a Q&A with Fantastic Fungi, and we had Paul and Louis on, and we were facilitating this conversation. And there were between 35 and 50,000 people on this Zoom Q&A.
Wow.
And literally, we were answering questions from Beirut, Lebanon to Bogota, Colombia, like all across the globe. And it struck us that at a time where we were being asked to be distant, we could feel the desire to be connected.
Mm.
And we took people into a meditation of what it was that brought them to be there. What was the desire? What was the longing that they had? And to feel that mycelial web that spread across the globe, bringing everybody together in that space. And that's so it's not the technology that's bad. It's the ways in which we continue to use it to numb, to distract, separate.
Yeah, it's what kind of energy are we, being contagious with? I think that COVID was a great example of how fast things can change and will. Yeah.
Well, on the 12th of June, so we're going to have this incredible moment of all being together. And I am so excited for that. And having had this conversation with you makes me even more excited, because the intentionality around that and that decision to be there together with other people all around the world and opening our eyes, connecting with each other, even if it's on our Zoom screens, and connecting with this other way that is possible and committing to it. As you say, we don't have long. Now is the time. Let's be the flowers in huge and small ways, and stay with that story now. So thank you both. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your
Thank you.
generosity. And we will put notes on this recording about the screening if there is another way. And also for anyone in ASA on the 18th of June, we are just so lucky to have Steve and Marcina coming to talk to us in our actual live session. So think about questions for them now. And yeah, you'll have a chance to speak to them on the 18th of June. So thank you both.
Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Roz. Thanks for all you do as well. And we look forward to being with the community and being with everybody on the 12th.
It's going to be beautiful. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Bye.